what does this accident mean for the regulation of nuclear energy?
Well, it means several things. In the first place, responsibility for a nuclear power plant's operation is held by the company running it. So in this case, TEPCO. Then responsibility is held by the national government, in this case Japan. But thirdly, there's a whole overarching global governance regime that is intended to recommend to governments and in turn operators a whole series of best practices, good ways of proceeding to produce nuclear energy in the safest and most secure way. What this latest accident reveals is that the global regime is not strong enough and cannot actually direct countries to meet certain standards. So the way the regime is constructed, you have a binding international agreement called the Nuclear Safety Convention, which all countries, including Japan, have signed. Then the International Atomic Energy Agency makes recommendations under that very broad treaty, but those recommendations are not compulsory, and every country can choose to run its nuclear industry as it pleases in terms of safety and security. This is not ideal because countries choose to do it differently. And in the case of Japan, they've chosen, for instance, to have a model which puts a lot of stress on the company running the reactor, much less stress on the government, and we've seen the government itself struggling to provide information to the general public and to the International Atomic Energy Agency about the accident. So this tells us that the global governance is not as strong as it should be. Industry views the International Atomic Energy Agency from somewhat of a distance. They, like a lot of companies, they don't want to be involved in over-regulation. They're wary of any government control, much less international control. But that has to be solved, that has to be changed.
And that's a global phenomenon.
That's a global phenomenon, yeah. So the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, is a government body. Its members are governments, not industry. And industry have been able to keep rather a hands-off from this, and the agency hasn't had the authority to bring them in. So one of our recommendations was that we need a global nuclear safety network involving all the stakeholders. That would be led by the IAEA, and it would involve governments and, most importantly, industry, and probably civil society as well, those who either support or are sceptical about nuclear, to hold them really to the fire so that everyone has a better idea of nuclear safety. What this does is show that you can have a double blow, a tsunami and a seismic event, which may be potentially catastrophic. And I suspect that most countries haven't taken this into account. And this is hugely important for several very important countries trying to get into the nuclear energy business for the first time. So Indonesia, Turkey and Italy are all planning new reactors.
And where's the technology in that discussion? Are modern reactors and plants safer?
I'm not sure they're focused on this. After 9/11, they started to focus on aircraft crashes, making the containment vessel strong enough to survive a 747. They weren't thinking about seismic means. The Japanese, quite rightly, have done the most research on this, and they're the ones who know how to make buildings in Tokyo, for instance, earthquake-proof. So they have the best ideas about this, but it's not clear they implemented them in this case, and other countries have a lot to learn. So this international centre set up by the IAEA was a Japanese-led initiative, but it's only 2 years old, so that really needs to be ramped up and a lot more resources put into that, and presumably the word then spread to countries which are in seismically active areas. And also insurance premiums will go up. One of the problems with nuclear is that the utilities can never afford to take out accident insurance, so the government always has to guarantee a certain amount of liability in this case. And that will go up for governments. The industry will say, we can't afford this. The governments will have to up the ante in terms of insurance coverage, and governments currently are strapped doing what they're doing anyway. It's hard to imagine they'll want to get into higher costs for nuclear.
And so will this affect us? Will a real shift in?
Probably not. Probably not. Because Canada will be continuing to export uranium to countries which I don't think will be deterred by this accident. So India, China, South Korea, Japan, all these countries will still continue with nuclear energy. You can't really turn off a whole nuclear program just overnight and replace it with something else. In fact, as you're building nuclear reactors from the beginning, it takes about a decade from the minute you conceive of it to the minute you plug it into the grid. So countries are building reactors as we speak, and they'll be very reluctant to suddenly switch their programs off.
So what's the horizon on that? If a country's building a reactor now, that means even if we were to take things offline, we're talking decades. Is that right?
Yes, but as we saw in Germany and Sweden, even though there's strong public opposition to nuclear, the governments just couldn't turn their reactors off overnight. They needed the power.
Yeah.
Particularly now that countries are worrying about greenhouse gas emissions and need to have relatively green technology, which nuclear is, they're not going to be shutting those reactors anytime soon, because they're also shutting coal-fired plants to avoid greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
So many governments will be cornered here. They won't quite know what to do.
Yeah.
And even if they respond to public opinion in an anti-nuclear fashion, they will probably announce that no more nuclear reactors will be built. The existing ones will be shut down in the coming decades.
Right.
As Germany and Sweden did after Chernobyl.